So not only we have seen that all the money is created through debt, but for the rich to continue to enrich themselves, more debt has to be created. So the system always creates more and more debt. So it is not sustainable. You cannot increase debt indefinitely. So the system will have to reset itself periodically and go through a cycle. The debt is accumulated by three different actors: the people, the businesses, and the government. And each one has a different cycle. Every cycle has two parts: a period of growth, where one tries to make more money to pay back the debt, and a period of collapse to reset the system and start all over again. If we look at the economic cycle of an individual, what a person earns during his or her life, it looks very much like a succession of stairs. To pay their bills and to pay for their mortgages and their debt, the people will constantly try to earn always more money. They can either work more or get a higher paid job. When they work more, they contribute to the increase of production, but when they ask for higher paid jobs, they contribute to inflation. But it won't be possible for them to always earn more, and they will sometimes lose their job or go through bankruptcy. Their earnings will collapse and they will have to start all over again. But the total collapse is unavoidable. When they die, all their debt is cancelled, and the moneylenders will repossess part of their wealth to recover their debt. The business cycle looks more like a wave. If we represent the flow of money in the economy, we see like a succession of waves. We observe a period of growth, followed by a period of recession, without any plateau or balanced state. To stop the recession and the contraction of the money supply, new money has to be injected. The moneylenders need to be willing to lend again at a low interest rate. And at first, this new money that is injected will directly contribute to an increase of production. It is important to realize that there are two ways the businesses make more money, either by selling more or by selling more expensive. At the beginning of the cycle, we just come out of recession, so there is room to grow, and the businesses are willing to conquer market shares. The businesses therefore will tend to make more money by increasing their production. But they cannot increase their production forever. At one stage, the production will stabilize, either because the needs of the consumers are met or because the consumers cannot afford to buy more. For example, even though everybody wants a luxury car, there is no need to produce more luxury cars if the consumers don't have the purchasing power to buy them. Once the market starts to saturate, the businesses will try to make more money and pay back their debt, not by selling more, but by selling more expensive, and that will create inflation. Inflation is the worst enemy of the moneylenders because it is eating away their money. So they are very vigilant to keep inflation low, and they will start to raise their interest rates to reduce inflation by making their money more expensive, more precious, and harder to get. Keep in mind that during a period of growth, the money supply is increasing, and therefore the debt is increasing. So the pressure to make more money to pay back this debt is never going away. As the whole system is going more and more into debt, there is more pressure for everyone to earn more money, and there is more pressure to create inflation. It has created a situation where consumers need to ask for a pay rise, and businesses need to increase their productivity and their prices. The system trying to repay back its growing debt will try to create inflation, and to prevent this and the depreciation of money, the moneylenders will increase their interest rates, and therefore slow down the growth, slow down the injection of money, and slow down the growth. But the pressure for inflation is still increasing with the growth. Therefore, the interest rates will continue to increase, and the growth will continue to slow down until the cycle reaches its peak. At the peak, the amount of money created by new loans is the same as the amount of money that is destroyed by the repayment of existing loans. There is no more increase of the money supply, and the growth has stopped. But if the people or the businesses are not going further into debt, the government, as we have seen, still needs to continue to borrow from the rich, and this time at a higher interest rate. So the pressure for inflation is not going away. But this time it's not possible for the money lenders to raise the interest rates without decreasing the money supply. That means businesses start to lose money, some are going bankrupt, jobs are lost, the purchasing power of the consumers decreases, and that starts a cascade of bankruptcies and job losses. The businesses don't seek to expand and make new loans. The money lenders are hesitant to lend money, but people still are paying back their loans. So you have a contraction of the money supply. And all these effects added together in a short period of time makes the fall much sharper than the growth. The economy will spiral down sharply into recession. When the supply of money contracts, a lot of people are losing money, and we are creating more misery. And not only we are creating more misery, but we are destroying our capability to produce, which actually could solve this misery. Understand that we arrive at a situation that is completely absurd. We have developed means of production to satisfy our needs, and because now there is this contraction of money and this shortage of money, we need to destroy those means of production and endure misery, but this is completely stupid. Especially when we can create money out of thin air. The recession is not created by a shortage of resources, it is created by the shortage of money, which can be created at will, and we can have an unlimited supply of it. So we understand why the people are angry and revolt. During the recession time, there is a lot of social upheaval, and they are right, there ought to be a better way. But let's continue with the absurd. During a recession, almost everyone is losing money. People are losing money, the businesses are losing money, and the banks are losing money, and some banks are going bankrupt. Banks can create money, and they go bankrupt. Why? Why is that? It's very important to understand how money is created. The commercial banks, the banks that people use for their deposit and their loans, can't actually create an unlimited amount of money. They are required by law to keep, let's say, 10% of the deposits of their customers as reserves, and they can lend the rest. The money that has been lent will return to the banks as deposit, and 90% of it will be lent again. And the process will continue, but because each time there is less and less money to lend, the process will stop when there is no money left to lend. If we now sum up the amount of money that is in the bank account of the people, we end up with 10 times the amount that was initially deposited. The bank didn't create actually money, it created debt that has been used to back up the supply of people's accounts. In this process that we call fractional banking, the banks have increased the money supply, but 90% of this money is not available, it is not actually in the bank's safe, it is owed by other people. That 90% of the people's accounts is not available, for the banks is not really a problem, because when people do business, they need to retrieve money and they give it to others we're returning back to the banks. So 10% should be enough normally to cover the variation of cash flow. And more the transfers are electronic and the cash is disappearing and the money won't even have to leave the banks. The problem comes when you have a lot of people defaulting on their loans, like it is at the time of a recession. Then if a bank doesn't have enough assets to cover its losses and balance its books, it will go bankrupt. And also when the people lose confidence in a bank, they all want to empty their account at the same time. That's what we call a bank run. And because the bank only keeps a fraction of the deposits as reserve, it will go bankrupt. So in our example, the commercial banks can only multiply by 10 an original amount of money that we can call M0, and this amount of money can only be created by the central bank. So the whole money supply is not controlled by all the banks, it is controlled by the central bank. The central bank creates M0 and the commercial banks just multiply it by 10 to optimize their business. To increase M0, the central bank will print money and buy with it treasury bonds from the public on the financial market. And to decrease M0, it is the opposite. The central bank will sell its treasury bonds on the financial market, and the money it will get from the sale of the bonds will be kept away from circulation or destroyed. In this way, the new money that is created by the central bank is backed by the treasury bonds. So it's a bit confusing because we have the impression it is the government that has created this money with treasury bonds, but actually not. It is the central bank that, to introduce this money, buys treasury bonds. It is not the government which makes the decision to create the new money, it is the central bank. And it's important to know because the central bank is a private business with shareholders, and the names of the shareholders are kept highly secret. There are a special group of money lenders that we can call the money masters because they are really in control of the money supply. They can create M0 and all the money they want with an unlimited amount independently from the government. And how do the money masters know the amount of money they need to create or retrieve from the market? They actually don't know. But what they are interested in is to lower as much as possible the interest rates so that a lot more people can borrow their money and it will contribute to growth and prosperity. And they want to do it without creating inflation, or at least up to a level of inflation they can tolerate. But it is up to the commercial banks, which are private businesses, to decide their own interest rates. However, when the money masters decide to decrease the interest rates, they buy from the public their treasury bonds, and the public puts this newly created money into the banks. The banks end up with more money to lend, and more money to lend means more competition in the lending business, and the interest rates will naturally decrease. And reversely, if the money masters want to increase the interest rates, then they will sell their treasury bonds to the public, and the money they will collect from the public will disappear from the bank accounts of the commercial banks. So they will have less money to lend, and less money to lend means they will increase their interest rates. So by monitoring the money supply, the money masters can also monitor the interest rates of the commercial banks. Therefore, it is this little group of money masters, and not all the money lenders, that control the economic cycle and make all the important decisions. And there are 3 important decisions in the cycle. The first important decision is to raise the interest rates to limit inflation. And that will be the beginning of the slowdown of the growth. And that's when the economists, or most of the economists, at least those who work for the money masters, are very misleading because they justify increasing the interest rate because the economy is overheating. We are injecting money too fast, and that creates inflation. And that's very misleading because the economy is not overheating. If the economy is overheating, that would mean that the shops are empty. That means that the people have so much money, spend money so fast, that the production cannot follow. But the shops are full, and there are plenty of people unemployed, many needs to fulfill, many people still living in poverty. So the economy is not overheating. There is not too much money in the economy. The problem is that there is too much debt in the economy. And that's creates inflation. Inflation, there is two main causes for inflation. The first cause for inflation is inflation itself. Inflation creates inflation. When some people raise their prices, other people follow. The cost of living increases and everyone raises their prices. And the second main cause for inflation, it's when people and businesses have too many bills to pay. And when they have too many bills to pay, they need to raise their prices. And the main bill is to repay for the loans and for the debts. It's big debts that increase with the money supply. So the pressure of the debt creates a pressure for inflation. And it's not the increase of the money supply that creates inflation. It is, yes, in a way, because we create money through debt. But the real reason is the debt, not the money. There is not enough money to absorb all the production, so we cannot speak about overheating. To be honest, we should say there is too much debt in the economy, and that creates inflation. Therefore, one of the main reasons for inflation is for the system to alleviate the burden of its debt. The second most important decision the money masters will make during the cycle is the decision to start a recession. And they will do that by raising the interest rates to a level that will contract the money supply. If they cannot avoid creating a recession to reset the cycle, they can still choose when they will reset the cycle. And this has given them a lot of political power, because they can decide to start a recession just before an election, for example. And if a government is not compliant enough, they can create a recession and economic difficulties to sway the elections for a more suitable candidate. It has been done many times in the past, and it is still being done today. And the third important decision the money masters will make during the cycle is the decision to stop the recession, increase the money supply, and start the period of growth. And these two can give them political leverage, because the government is dependent on the willingness of the money masters to increase the money supply. At this stage, you understand that the main decisions for the economic cycle are not made by the government, but are made by the money masters. They are the ones who decide when we have a period of growth and when we have a period of recession. We are used to hear the government taking all the credit for the prosperity and the economic growth, and also shifting all the blames during the hard times. But now we understand that they are not really in charge. Those who are really in control of the economy are the money masters. We will better understand the role of the government in the economy by studying the last debt cycle, the government cycle. If the business cycle looks like a wave, the government cycle looks like a tsunami. To understand why, we can have a look at the debt of the government, and we see that it always goes up. And so it's a big concern for the economists, And especially because each time they try to address or reduce the national debt, they put the country into recession. And we have explained why. Because to maintain the level of economic activity, the government needs to spend money. If it doesn't, the purchasing power of the consumers will decrease, and that creates recession. Remember, each time the consumers buy something, not all the money is returning back to the consumers as wages, because the owners of the means of production keep a certain amount to enrich themselves. So there is always this lack of money that is not returning back, and it is the government, by spending money, who will compensate for this lack. So it can give this money directly to the consumers through social aid or by paying wages to the civil servants, but also it can give it indirectly by just spending the money. For example, if we take the case of the United States, with their huge spending on defense, the government creates a lot of jobs and wages for the consumers. So the United States, who claims to be a liberal country, actually now with this huge spending of the government, you have more than half of the population who works directly or indirectly for the government. So it is halfway to be a communist country where the government employs everybody. So here is what is important to realize. With the free market, whatever the government, whether it is a government far on the left, social liberal, or whether it is a government which is ultra-liberal on the far right, the government will still have to spend the same amount of money just to avoid the recession. And it is the amount of money that the owners of the means of production keep aside to enrich themselves. The governments only differ by the way they spend the money. The social liberals on the left tend to increase the size of the government and therefore give more wages to the civil servants, and as well as increase social aid, and that will contribute directly to the purchasing power of the consumers. And then you have the ultra-liberals who tend to decrease the size of the government, decrease social aid, and they try to privatize everything. But they still contribute to elevate the purchasing power of the consumers by paying private companies which offer jobs to the consumers instead of the government. If the government has two different ways to spend the money, it still needs to find the money to sustain the economy. It cannot get this money by taxing the consumers because this money is meant to be given to the consumers. It could tax the rich, but this will not work because the rich will transfer the cost of the taxes in the price of their goods and services. The consumers will end up paying for the taxes. There is no way the rich will give up enriching themselves. So if the government takes them some money, they will get it back from the consumers. Taxing the rich will end up creating inflation and be completely useless. If the government has to spend money but cannot get it from taxation without defeating the purpose, it will have to borrow it from the rich. And therefore there is no escape for the government, whether they come from the left or from the right. They still have to go further and further into debt just to sustain the economy. And this is why, whatever the government, the national debt is always increasing. And that's why the politicians and the economists who blame the government for going more and more into debt are really mistaken. Because this is a systemic problem. This is not a government problem. And all governments who try to reduce the national debt just end up reducing the purchasing power of the consumers and create recessions. But the government cannot go into debt indefinitely. There is a limit. So what is this limit? The limit is when the creditors, the rich, lose confidence in the ability of the government to pay back its debt. And you know when this happens, when you see the government being desperate for money. It starts to sell all its assets. Transport, airport, energy, water, everything it can sell. And that's all the privatization that we see at the moment. But then when we have the government running out of creditors willing to lend it money, then we have the big collapse, what we call a depression, the tsunami. The consuming power spirals down, leading to bankruptcies, leading to bank runs. It could all be preceded by an hyperinflation because the currency is backed by government bonds. So if the people lose confidence in government bonds, then you could have the devaluation of the currency and an hyperinflation. And of course, you create the conditions of big upheaval and revolution and wars. And the government trying to shift the blame and find a scapegoat. So it's very likely that the country goes to war and you create a big destruction. And that's the condition also for the emergence of an authoritarian government who will restart the system with a new currency. And after this destruction and the cancellations of all the debts through hyperinflation or by changing the system, you restart the cycle and you make room for a new period of growth. For us who live in the Western world, we have been told by our educators, by society, by the media, by the politicians that we live in the best possible economic system. And now I hope you realize that it's far to be the best. A system that needs periodically to reset itself, destroy its productive infrastructure and create misery, it's certainly not an optimum system. Or at least it's not optimum for everybody. Because for a very small minority of people, it's actually very good. For the money masters, those who are in control of the money supply and the economic cycle, they can profit during the period of growth, but they can profit even more during the recession. They can sell their vulnerable assets just before they decide to start a recession, and they can buy everything at the lowest market price just before they decide to restart a new period of growth. The money masters are actually a very small amount of families. They control all the central banks, but also all the major banks in the world. And because they have accumulated so much wealth, they also control all the transnational corporations, which have been proven to be all interconnected and controlled by a small amount of people. So they exercise an enormous control over the economy that has given them enormous political power and mediatical power. This is the reason why we never hear about them and the extent of their power, but we know they exist. And we start to realize that they manipulate the information to make us believe we are free to rule ourselves by choosing our own government. But actually our government is not the real power, and is certainly powerless to change the status quo, to change the system, and to oppose the control of the money masters. You can realize the power of the money masters over the information by noticing that no serious politicians have been in campaign against their power and their control. But just over 100 years ago, it was a very important political issue. And you could say the same about the economists. No serious, or I should say academic economist today is in a rebellion against the economic power of the money masters. So this system is working very well for the money masters, but it's also working for the money lenders and the rich, who are the same, because the rich are both owners of means of production and money lenders. They invest their money in shares and own parts of the means of production, but also they buy bonds and lend their money to banks and to people, to businesses, and of course to the government as the most secure investment. As we have seen, the free market, which relies on private property and free competition, gives an enormous advantage to the rich. And in the last 200 years, they progressively acquired all the powers, including the one of creating money. The free market has now evolved in a system that is controlled by the richest and that is designed to enrich the rich and enslave the people through debt. A system that makes sure the people cannot afford to buy all the productions they need or they want, a production that, by the way, they have themselves produced, without borrowing from the rich, so that the people keep coming back to work to repay their loans. The supporters of the free market don't realize that the free market they think of as long gone. The free market for the individuals, where the people could come and sell and buy their products freely. Now it's a free market for the corporations. And there is no competition between the corporations and the individuals, because the corporations win all the time. The free market for the people, it's a job market. It is a competition to serve the rich, to serve our masters. So what they think of, what they defend in the free market, it's a free enterprise. We should be able to start our own business and to be a... And this is very good. Free enterprise is very good. But here as well, the entrepreneurs have no chance. As soon as they need finance to expand their business when they grow, then they have to give away part of their businesses to give it to the moneylenders, to the rich, to those who have money, and who will buy share of their business until progressively they lose the control of the business. And the rich will take over their ideas and their business and make most of the profit. And the greatest success of our elites is to make us believe that we are free. We believe that we are free because there is a way out. There is a way out. If you work very hard, if you save money, you too you can become a moneylender and a slave master. So the door of the jail is open, and we all know it's open, but it's so narrow. It is so narrow, and we have to compete with each other to go through. And the very few who succeed become the heroes of our time. We see them everywhere, on covers of magazines, on TVs. The entrepreneurs of the people who made it to the other side have been given to us as models and make all of us believe that it is possible to all go to the other side if we follow their examples. But no, only a very few can because of the competition. Only a very few can be selected. And selected to what? Selected to a parasitic life where you make money with your money while other people work for you or are paying back the interest on their loans so you can enjoy your freedom and your lifestyle. You have been selected to become, you too, a slave master. But thankfully, the free market, which is the basis of capitalism and liberalism, which has created so much suffering, so many wars, so much misery, through competition between people and between nations. Thankfully, this system, this awful system, is now dying and will disappear forever. And this will be created by the last transformation we are going to see, which is the arrival of the smart machines.